Basically, as a child, I learned to computer program, and that was just because I was bored a lot, and we had a computer at home, and yeah, it was really cool to see that I could make it do stuff. That's not. I think that when you hear of a child learning to program, you might think like, oh, that was super complicated or super smart or stuff like that. It wasn't really like that. It's more. It was more like playing with Legos, because programming in its very core is quite simple, and fortunately we had some little books which really nice and simply explained how to program. So I did that, and the nice thing about being a child is you do often not understand that which things are supposed to be difficult and which aren't. Like adults will look at programming and think like, oh fuck, that's like that's super complicated, but for me as a child it was more simple command that makes the computer go and then another command that changes the color of a shape or something like that. And then you can just play around with these things, which I very much enjoyed as a kid. In high school I had two interests, which were both painting and making music. I was interested in both aspects, but I couldn't choose both of them in school. So I then chose painting instead of music, because basically the teachers were otherwise worried that I would do too much fun stuff and not learn enough skills that are actually useful for the outside world. After 1 year of study in architecture, which I quit, then 3 years of psychology, which I quit, I decided to go into music actually again, because I had been doing more and more music in my free time with tracker programs, which are old school sort of sampling things on the computer. So I went into music. I studied music and technology in Hilversum in the Netherlands, so there I thought, okay, now instead of doing the painting part, I'm choosing music again. But within that study, I discovered a lot of the technical aspects of how you can program a computer to create a certain type of generative composition, or how to create your own sounds with the help of mathematical formulas and that kind of stuff. That was really interesting because I got introduced to the programming language Max MSP, and with this programming language Max MSP you could also and can still create and manipulate visuals. So all of a sudden I had this one core with which I could create music, but also I could create visuals. I was very inspired, even before I thought I was going to do anything with visuals or music, by the works of people like Chris Cunningham or Alexander Rutherford, who made videos for Aphex Twin and Alltaker, and those videos were very much tightly synchronized to the music. And I found it very cool that having that very strong, sensitive combination between visuals and music, it creates almost like an alternate reality, just like we perceive our reality to a large degree through sounds and visuals. By combining multiple senses into one bigger whole, you can create something that in some ways has the potential to suck you in even more. My initial experiments were super simple, but my imagination was running wild with what could possibly happen if I would get deeper into this and what the possibilities could be. There some spark got lit and I had something to do this all for. I made my own sequencers, which were visual and giving sounds. Got a better feeling of how to compose things onto a screen. Slowly I got more and more out of a purely technical mindset of, technical mindset is more thinking, what can you do with programming? Oh, you can have it audio reactive, and you can have it respond to media, to triggers, and you can do all these kind of things of having, a music computer and a visual computer speak with each other in all kind of ways, and through analysis you can do all kind of amazing stuff. But that doesn't make it good. This can make it a programmer's wet dream, but that's something completely different from something that will also appeal to somebody who doesn't give a shit about programming, but just wants to have a beautiful experience. So very slowly I got to understand these things, going from very much the nerdy side to a little bit more artistic, more free way of thinking. I started working with Robert Henke, aka Monolake, also one of the creators of Ableton originally. Before that I'd always done a combination of visuals and music. Now it was the first time that somebody else was doing the music and I was doing the visuals. I guess it also went from initially having everything very tightly synchronized, repetitive and boring, with just letting the computer do all these decisions, and then we had a period of just almost the other extreme, having absolutely no connection, and purely by feeling, changing the visuals according to what's happening in the music. And then still later we reintroduced some synchronicity that was happening through the computers, but we did that in a very deliberate way. When do we need this? When do we not need this? When does the heart basically need to speak? And when, in which parts and which moments does the computer add something extra? Because of course, a computer can do things in a very tight and precise way that you can never do with all your heart emotions. But then again, all your heart emotions can go into certain emotional states that a computer will never be able to analyze for you. So yeah. Within this audio-visual mode of the program, at some point I had created this possibility of recording people just through a webcam input and microphone input, of recording them and having them loop. And I could have these loops layered as audio-visual layers on top of each other. They were also even placed in a three-dimensional virtual space, so I could fly through the camera recordings that were made by people. That was pretty cool, I thought, and also somehow very strongly that thought entered my head that I want Thom Yorke to be inside that program. I thought that would be really beautiful to have him do this, and somehow it felt through the things I'd seen of him and the experiments that he was into that, yeah, somehow it felt like that would be something that would be really cool. And at the same time I also thought that was never going to happen because, yeah, that didn't seem very likely. There was one friend who did basically pushed me a little bit and said, well, maybe it's not as crazy as you think, and some people in the music industry now, because you've been performing quite a bit, maybe just ask around and see if anybody knows anybody who's in the neighborhood of Radiohead or Thom Yorke. So I did ask around, and then one technician that I'd worked with Monolake, aka Robert Henke, he knew Andy Watson, who does lighting design for Radiohead. So he introduced me to Andy Watson. Andy said, "Oh, sure, that's interesting. Maybe you can come by a gig and we can meet." So I went to a gig of Radiohead in Berlin. With also all my gear with me in my backpack, which was a really difficult time to get it through the security and everything. But with some help of the crew of Radiohead, I managed to get through. And I met Andy at the after party. He had not seen any of my work or any of my links. He was just being polite, essentially. But because I had all my stuff with me, I essentially put him on the spot. That wasn't my intention, but because I had all my stuff with me, he basically just had the choice of, okay, either you're going to be an asshole and you are not going to let me show it to you, or you're going to reward me for all my effort and let me show it to you. So of course he said, yeah, okay, sure, go ahead, show me. So we went into another room. I showed the stuff, he was interested, and he said, oh, hold on, Tom needs to see this. And then 5 minutes later, Thom Yorke was shaking my hand, and I was explaining him all the stuff that I was doing with my three-dimensional visuals and how I could manipulate them with sliders in real time. It's a little bit like a computer game, in a sense. That in a computer game, when you change all kinds of stuff or you move with your character into another room, everything changes, right? The colors and the shapes and everything. That's a little bit comparable to what I do. And so I was showing him how the visuals were all changing according to what I was doing with my sliders. He was super interested. And a little bit later, 2 months later, he asked if I was interested in maybe doing a video for an Atoms for Peace song that was coming out. So yeah, I did that. And then a little later, because he very much liked the result, he said, well, maybe would you be interested in joining Nigel and me for some gigs that we're going to do? So we did 3 gigs together. That also was a really nice collaboration. So sort of from that moment on it was clear, okay, we're going to see where this can grow. I work actually mostly with Max MSP, but within Max MSP there's also the option of using Java code. So Max MSP, the programming language, looks like you have a bunch of little blocks. Again, almost like Lego. You can make the blocks connect to each other and then you build a machine. Just like you build a real machine out of all kind of little elements that you can buy in the store and then it works together. That's also the same within Max. And one of those blocks inside my Max machine, I made the inside of that block with Java code. So that's one very specifically complicated little block which has a whole bunch of programming in written language that all fits into that little visual block. So it's a combination of that Java code and regular Max machine code. Yeah, and I use this other programming language called processing, which is in a way sort of a Java library. It's made to simplify making real-time visuals with Java. So I'm also using elements of processing. I will be getting absolutely no information from Thom or Nigel, at least not through the software. All the information that I'll be getting is coming through my eyes and my ears. And of course I know the songs and what is supposed to happen. And basically it comes down to understanding what I'm hearing and having some motor memory within my fingers to know when I want to do what exactly. But everything is purely live in that sense. I do have BPM. With every song it is clear beforehand how many beats per minute it's going to be, what tempo things are. So I do have that pre-programmed so that if I basically tap like a little rhythm on the computer just to tell the computer where we are in the beat, then it will just continue in the correct BPM. And then if I see that certain things on the screen are maybe flashing slightly ahead of time or slightly, you know, too late, I can also a little bit adjust that so that I see things happening exactly in the right spot. And that's of course then how I can still use the computer help to create more precision in time than I would be able to do if I was going to do things manually all the time. Yeah. I hate the keyboards for live performance. I do everything with MIDI controller, so that has a bunch of knobs and a bunch of sliders. That's the Behringer BCF 2000, which is I think out of production now, but it's a really cool machine because it has 14-bit MIDI, which means that normally MIDI has 127 steps between 0 and 127, so that's 128 steps. That sucks. It's very anti-musical and it's very anti-art. It leaves no room for subtlety. But if you have 14-bit, you have way more steps in between. So you can be way more sensitive with this, what you do with the slider. The machine picks it up way more subtly, rather than to have these like tuk, very crude steps. So that's why I like that machine, and it has motorized faders, and it's not incredibly expensive. So with motorized faders, I mean, when I go to new presets, it sets all the sliders into right positions, and I can also feel where I am, you know, what's going on. I like that the computer can move the sliders for me also. Yeah. I could go wild and jam in all kinds of directions, and that's also very important that I can do that, because sometimes I might feel a certain impulse during a track. Also, especially when we're still developing a show, or there's new screens or all kind of new elements, or the crowd is very different or whatever, or maybe something goes wrong in the music, I want to be able to respond to that. So I always want to have the freedom to take things into a really different direction. But in general, I do have, just like, you know, a musician within a certain song, you do know at some point the chord structure, and you want to generally stick inside of that. Sure, sometimes be a little bit dissonant, of course, that's always cool, but also you want to make it a coherent, bigger whole. It's really nice to be on stage with them. It's nice for several reasons. Well, one of the reasons is I get to experience from close by the brightness and the bigness of the screen, so I can respond to it in that kind of a way. It's not a small thing, very much in the distance. I can feel, yeah. Somehow, when I feel the impact of the thing, I start thinking about the visuals in a different way. I sometimes, for instance, would make I would go more subtle in a way, or sometimes a little bit darker, because every tiny little motion is amplified because it's quite close. So I understand more clearly that I can make small movements to already have quite a big impact. And if, for instance, if you look at the things in a monitor or from a distance, you might feel the need to go bigger and brighter. Which is also often more exhausting to an audience. And of course, I want to go big and I want to go bright and I want to sometimes really explode. But in order to explode properly, you also need to go really small so people can, experience. It's all relative. If you're going to have your screen bright and big all the time, then it will seem smaller than if you go from something very small and you make it grow and then at some point the perception of space becomes very different. It's good for people like me. Very often the visuals are just this thing in the background. People do not know if it's a machine or it's a whatever, and it's not being seen as a form of art. And I think that one of my things that I really want to do, both in the visuals themselves as also through standing there, is I want to show, no, this is and can be art. This here is an artist. That there is something that's very specifically made, and it's done real time, it's done live. It's as much a part of the whole thing as the music is. And I would like to see more of that just also in shows like these, that you see that more often, that the visual artists get more acknowledgement. And also by them getting more acknowledgement, they might also start taking themselves more seriously and start making better visuals also. Because if you're being shoved to the side and you get shitty treatment, low pay and all that kind of shit, then people have less motivation to give their very, very, very best. Yeah, and I want more people to go in that direction.